In 1984, a group of young actors stepped in front of the cameras to play teenagers who wake up one morning to find their small Colorado town invaded by Soviet and Cuban paratroopers. Red Dawn turned high schoolers into guerrilla fighters called the Wolverines, and in doing so it launched or cemented some of the biggest careers of the 1980s. The film became a cultural touchstone almost immediately, remembered for its earnestness, its Cold War anxiety, and for introducing or elevating a cluster of young performers who would go on to define an entire era of American film. More than 4 decades later, some of those actors are gone. Some are still working quietly in the background of the industry that made them famous, and a couple of them became some of the most talked about names in Hollywood for reasons that had nothing to do with war movies. Behind them stood a supporting cast of seasoned character actors, veterans of westerns and crime dramas, whose own lives carried just as much drama as anything scripted for the screen. Here is what became of the cast of Red Dawn, then and now. The triumphs, the losses, and the quieter second acts that followed the cameras home. Patrick Swayze played Jed Eckert, the oldest of the Eckert brothers and the reluctant leader who holds the Wolverines together after their town falls. Swayze was born on August 18, 1952, in Houston, Texas, and was in his early 30s when he took on the role, bringing a physical intensity that came naturally to him. His mother, Patsy Swayze, was a respected dance choreographer, and Patrick trained in ballet and gymnastics from childhood, while also playing football, an athletic background that shaped the controlled, coiled-up presence he brought to every role that followed, from Dirty Dancing to Roadhouse to Ghost. He married Lisa Nemi in 1975, and the two stayed together until his death nearly 34 years later, weathering the loss of a pregnancy and periods of heavy drinking that Swayze later spoke about openly, describing how he worked to get his drinking under control rather than let it define him. In January 2008, Swayze was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, one of the most aggressive and least survivable forms of the disease. He chose to keep working through treatment, filming the A&E series The Beast while undergoing chemotherapy, and he spoke publicly about wanting to spend his remaining time creating rather than waiting. Patrick Swayze died on September 14, 2009, at his home in Los Angeles at the age of 57, roughly 20 months after his diagnosis. In the years between his diagnosis and his death, he became something of a public face for pancreatic cancer awareness, giving interviews about the disease's brutal odds while continuing to push through physically demanding work. He left behind a body of work across film, television, and music, and by most public estimates his estate was valued in the tens of millions of dollars. His ashes were scattered privately in New Mexico, on land he and Lisa had shared, and Lisa Nemi has continued to speak about their marriage and his final months in interviews and in her own writing, describing a partnership that endured hardship most couples never face and still held together until the very end. C. Thomas Howell played Robert Morris, one of the younger Wolverines whose fear and determination captured just how young these fighters really were. Howell was born on December 7, 1966, in Los Angeles, the son of stuntman Chris Howell, and he grew up around film sets long before Red Dawn made him a name of his own. He had already appeared in E.T. the Extraterrestrial and The Outsiders as a teenager, and the attention that came with early fame did not always translate into an easy adulthood. His first marriage, to Ray Dawn Chom, lasted only a short time, arriving around the period when the comedy Soul Man drew heavy criticism over its premise and cast a shadow over his career for years. He later married Sylvie Anderson, and the couple had 3 children before divorcing in 2016. Rather than chase leading man status as the industry's tastes changed, Howell shifted into steady character work and long-running television, with credits including Southland and a long list of independent films, several of which he wrote or directed himself. Today, C. Thomas Howell is in his late 50s, still acting regularly, and also making music under the name Tommy Howell. He has spoken in interviews about how growing up inside the industry, rather than discovering it as an adult, shaped both his resilience and his willingness to keep reinventing himself once the leading roles stopped coming. His path has been less about a dramatic comeback than about simply continuing to work, film after film, in an industry that moved its spotlight elsewhere decades ago, a quieter kind of longevity that has kept him employed steadily for more than 4 decades. Leah Thompson played Erica, one of the young women who joins the Wolverines and grounds the group emotionally. Thompson was born on May 31st, 1961, in Rochester, Minnesota, to a large family. Her mother was a musician, and Leah trained seriously in ballet from childhood with hopes of a professional dance career. An assessment from choreographer Mikhail Baryshnikov that she did not have the right build for ballet redirected her toward acting instead, a pivot that led to breakout roles in Back to the Future and Some Kind of Wonderful. She was engaged to Dennis Quaid in the mid-1980s before the relationship ended, and in 1989 she married director Howard Deutsch, with whom she has 2 daughters, actresses Madeline and Zoe Deutsch. Thompson kept working steadily through the following decades, starring in the sitcom Caroline in the City, and later moving behind the camera to direct episodes of television series, including some in The Switched at Birth and Nashville World. Now in her 60s, Leah Thompson continues to act and direct, and by most accounts she and her husband have built a comfortable, low-drama life in an industry that chewed up many of her peers. She has spoken in interviews about deliberately choosing directing as a second career path, rather than waiting for age-appropriate leading roles that Hollywood was slow to offer women of her generation, and that choice has kept her working behind the camera on a steady stream of television projects well into her 60s. Hers is one of the rare stories from this cast, defined by steady reinvention rather than collapse. Charlie Sheen played Matt Eckert, Jed's younger brother, whose impulsiveness and fear give the film much of its raw nerve. Sheen was born Carlos Owen Estevez on September 3, 1965, in New York City, the son of actor Martin Sheen, and he grew up around film sets, making home movies, with friends including Rob Lowe and Sean Penn. He rose to fame quickly through Platoon and Wall Street, and substance use became part of his life early, running alongside the career highs. His personal life included a brief 1995 marriage to Donna Peel, a marriage to Denise Richards that produced 2 daughters before ending in a highly public split, and a third marriage to Brooke Mueller that also ended in divorce after the birth of twin sons. Sheen went on to headline 2.5 Men and become one of the highest-paid actors on television, a run that ended abruptly in 2011 amid a very public breakdown and his firing from the show. In November 2015, Sheen disclosed on the Today Show that he had been diagnosed HIV-positive back in 2011, revealing that he had spent years paying people to keep the diagnosis quiet before deciding to go public himself. Now in his 60s, Charlie Sheen continues to speak openly about his health and his past, including in a 2025 memoir and a Netflix documentary, describing the years he spent paying to keep his diagnosis secret as more damaging to him than the illness itself. He still takes on smaller film and television roles, and has said in recent interviews that his health today is stable and well managed. His arc remains one of the more dramatic in Hollywood, enormous, fast success followed by a very public unraveling, and a slower, more recent effort to reframe his own story on his own terms, in his own words, rather than through the tabloid headlines that once defined him. Jennifer Grey played Toni Mason, the fiercely protective older sister among the Wolverines. Grey was born on March 26, 1960, in New York City, the daughter of Oscar-winning actor and dancer Joel Grey, and she grew up training in both dance and acting. After early roles, including Ferris Bueller's Day Off, she became a household name almost overnight with Dirty Dancing in 1987. That same year, Grey was in a car accident in Northern Ireland in which 2 people died. She has spoken publicly about the lasting emotional weight that experience left with her. In the early 1990s, she underwent rhinoplasty, and she has said in interviews since that the change affected how recognizable she was to casting directors at a moment when her face had become closely tied to her stardom, something she has reflected on candidly, without ever framing it as a simple regret. Grey stepped back from the spotlight through much of the 1990s, working selectively, before returning to wide public attention when she won the first season of Dancing with the Stars in 2010. Now in her mid-60s, Jennifer Grey continues to act, has written a candid memoir about her life and career, and remains one of the most recognizable faces from the film, even as she has spoken about how quickly and completely fame can reshape and sometimes erase an identity. She has also spoken publicly about the grief that followed the 1987 accident and about the long process of coming to terms with survival, giving her story a depth that goes well beyond the dirty dancing girl label the industry once boxed her into. Powers Boothe played Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Tanner, the downed Air Force pilot who becomes a mentor figure to the Wolverines partway through the film. Boothe was born on June 1, 1948, in Snyder, Texas, and grew up working on his family's cotton farm before earning a scholarship that led him toward theater rather than the ranching life he was raised in. He built a long career playing commanding, morally complicated figures, later known for roles in Deadwood, Nixon, Sin City, and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. He married Pam Cole in 1969, and the couple remained married for the rest of his life, raising 2 children largely outside the public eye. Boothe was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and he continued working through much of his illness before dying on May 14, 2017, in Los Angeles at the age of 68, with cardiopulmonary arrest listed as the immediate cause. He was remembered by colleagues as a steady, serious craftsman whose long marriage and quiet family life stood apart from the more turbulent stories of some of his younger Red Dawn co-stars, and tributes from directors and co-stars alike singled out the discipline he brought to every set, a discipline that traced directly back to the farm work of his childhood. Harry Dean Stanton played Tom Eckert, Jed and Matt's father, whose capture by the invading army sets much of the plot in motion. Stanton was born on July 14, 1926, in West Irvine, Kentucky, and by the time he made Red Dawn in his late 50s, he was already a veteran character actor with credits stretching back decades, including Cool Hand Luke and Alien. He never married and had no children, living instead a famously independent, largely private life built around music and long friendships within the entertainment industry. Stanton kept working right up until his death, appearing in Twin Peaks, The Return, and completing the lead role in the film Lucky shortly before he died. He passed away on September 15, 2017, in Los Angeles at the age of 91, one of the longest lives among this cast, and he was remembered as one of the great American character actors, someone whose quiet, weathered presence anchored dozens of films across a 7-decade career. Directors including David Lynch and Wim Wenders often described him as an actor who communicated more through stillness and silence than most performers could manage with pages of dialogue, and Lucky, released after his death, is widely regarded as a fitting final statement from a man who spent his whole life avoiding the spotlight even as he stood repeatedly at its edge. Darren Dalton played Daryl Bates, the mayor's son whose story explores what happens when fear compromises loyalty within the group. Dalton was born Darren Jack Dalton on February 9, 1965, in Powell, Wyoming, and grew up partly on a cattle ranch before his family moved to Albuquerque, where he discovered acting through a high school stagecraft class. He was cast by Francis Ford Coppola in The Outsiders in 1983, which led directly to Red Dawn the following year alongside several of the same young co-stars. He married Kristen Dalton in 1993, and the couple divorced in 2009. After his acting career slowed in the 1990s and 2000s, Dalton moved into screenwriting and producing, working on projects including The Day the Earth Stopped and War of the Worlds 2, The Next Wave, several of them alongside his old Red Dawn and Outsiders co-star C. Thomas Howell. Now in his early 60s, Darren Dalton continues to write and produce, having built a long, low-profile second act behind the camera rather than in front of it. Brad Savage played Danny Bates, Daryl's younger brother, whose fear brings a painful vulnerability to the film. Savage was born on December 9, 1965, in Livonia, Michigan, and began working as a child actor practically as a toddler, appearing in commercials and films, including No Deposit, No Return before he was even school-aged. His performance in Red Dawn earned him a Young Artist Award nomination, but like many child actors, he found the transition to adult roles difficult, and he gradually stepped back from acting. He married in the late 1980s and built a quieter life centered on music, playing, and singing in various projects over the years. Now in his 60s, Brad Savage lives largely outside the entertainment spotlight, a low-key example of a former child star who chose stability over chasing a fame that had already peaked in adolescence. Doug Toby played Aardvark, the streetwise, wisecracking member of the Wolverines, whose humor offers brief relief from the film's tension. Toby was born on July 13, 1964, in Los Angeles. Little detailed biographical information about his early life has been widely reported, which is itself telling. After Red Dawn and a handful of other film roles in the years that followed, Toby's acting career slowed considerably, and he moved largely out of public view. He is remembered by fans mainly for this single role, an example of how one part in a culturally significant film can follow an actor for decades.